Well, good morning. It is great to be with you at home. A bit of a surprise this week to all find ourselves here back at home like this. But what an amazing thing to be able to be together. If we haven't met, my name is Dean. I'm part of the team at True North, and great to get to spend some time with you as you're watching this. You know, when you get these kind of the nature a little bit of just our world and the way everything's operating at the moment, there can be these kind of quick and unexpected changes to life that we all kind of experience together. And all of a sudden, all of us are rearranging weekends and schedules. And that can be a little bit challenging, a little bit disorientating at times. And what we're actually doing as a church this next few weeks is we're starting a series today. And the series is called Live by Love. And it's all about the idea that actually no matter what comes our way in life and no matter what we, find ourselves suddenly or sometimes unexpectedly or sometimes it's just how life is traveling, there is this one consistent thing that we believe we can always navigate by, and that is to live by love. And so we're going to be exploring what does that mean and how we find that in the scriptures. You know, this past week, I actually found myself in a very suddenly disorientating place. If you don't, it's your first time here. If you know, my wife, Lisa, and I are expecting a baby and about the end of July. And that is, we've had a baby before, but it was 10 years ago. And so the whole thing has been an unexpected blessing in our lives and our family. And so this past week, though, because there's this big gap, there's a lot I don't really remember about what it's like to have a baby. And we went somewhere this week that I found overwhelming and disorientating, and it was a baby store. It's this place called Baby Bunting. If you've never been there, they should probably just rename it Baby Bunnings, because it's basically like, if you've never been there, it's like Bunnings, but baby stuff. And so we went into this store, and as soon as I walked in, it just felt like this, whoa, it was overwhelming. There was so much baby stuff, and it was kind of like, where do I even start? And so I went to, we walked around, Lisa and I were there, and, she kind of felt same as me. I don't think it was just a guy thing here, but, you could tell, I'm sure somewhere in this store, there are things that we're going to need. There are things that we know are going to be important, or probably some things that we want, but there was just so much. It was just overwhelming. We went to the car lot. I mean, the pram lot, there's so many prams. You didn't know there were so many of those things and all different features. So, luckily there was a lady who kind of saw us and we were talking to her and she said, do you guys need help? She maybe see that kind of deer in the headlights kind of vibe. And we're like, yes, we need help. We need some way to make sense of all this and figure out what do we actually need? What do we not need? What do we want, not want? Where do you even start? And here's the thing, in lots of ways, life can often thrust us into those kinds of moments where we just find ourselves, confronted by or experiencing life is this incredibly complex experience at times. It is ever changing. It's always dynamic. It's often unexpected. And in the midst of all the different elements, relationships, family, friendships, careers, jobs, what we're going to do with our lives, unexpected challenges we face. In the face of all of it, how do we find something that helps us navigate and figure out, okay, where do I go? What do I really need? What am I after? And we really believe as followers of Jesus that he has helped us to actually find, this key that can help unlock and make sense of how we actually find what we need and what we're meant for. There's this great story. It shows up in all the Gospels, but in Mark, Jesus is asked this question of what is the most important thing? Like, of all the commands in the scriptures and in the Hebrew scriptures and really there's all these different laws and ideas, and there's all these different different elements to the scriptures. And this person asked Jesus, what's the most important? What actually does it all come down to? What do people need? And Jesus answers famously in Mark chapter 12. I'll just read you his words here. He says, the most important of all the commandments, he says, the most important is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. You know, I really love this idea of being able to narrow in on what Jesus says is that this is what is the most important. There is so much complexity in life, and yet here is what Jesus does for us to bring simplicity to how we can actually navigate life. In so many ways, he's giving us a true north and saying, you know what, you can navigate your whole life by this, that life is about loving God and loving other people. You know, there's one of my favorite books and that I've read in the last few years, a book called The Jesus Creed by author Scott McKnight. Encourage you, if you want to kind of read more and reflect on this more, it's a great book if you're a reading kind of person. And in his book, he really just talks about this idea of what Jesus is doing here, is he's taking this ancient, this Hebrew verses about loving God. And it was something that the ancient Jewish people, they would have recited this kind of prayer every day, the Lord is one, and this command to love him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And Jesus is going to say, that's the pointy end of the stick. That is what is most important, and everything else falls under that. And then Jesus adds to that idea that not only to love God, which was what they kind of knew, and he adds to it that this second piece of it is now out of that, to love your neighbor, to love others as you love yourself. And Scott McKnight calls that the Jesus Creed. And he basically says this becomes this simple, focusing, orientating key that helps us make sense of it all. And I think it's such a brilliant, area to focus on in our lives, because it is what allows us to go, you know what, in any and every situation, there's almost nothing life can throw at us that we cannot navigate better if we ask ourselves, how in this situation can I love God with all my heart? And or how in this situation can I love others as myself? And those two questions will always point us. They'll always direct us. They'll always help us to navigate whatever situation, whatever life stage we find ourselves in. You know, the beautiful thing about these is they are these orientation points for us. And so over the course of the series, Live by Love, we're just going to be exploring what does it look like to navigate our lives by this idea of loving God and loving others. And the challenge is, I guess, first off, and so where we'll be gonna look next today, is we have to ask this question, how do we understand what that love is and looks like? We live in a world that, can have all kinds of different views and ideas, and I guess guesses at what love is all about. But we're going to see how do we actually, if we want to live as followers of Jesus, what does that love look like, and how do we experience it? And one of the people best kind of positioned to talk us through this is one of Jesus' close followers named John. And John, he walked with Jesus, lived with Jesus. He was one of his closest disciples. And he writes a letter in his later years. And in his letter, he uses the word love something like 40 times or something like that in this pretty short 4-chapter letter. He uses, it's like this disproportionate amount of the use of the word love in this one short letter written by John, compared to almost the whole New Testament. Love is always prominent, but John is just like it, just boom, it's jumping out everywhere. And so we're going to look a little bit at what he grew to understand about what love looks like from walking with Jesus, learning from Jesus. And so I want to read you these verses. It comes from 1 John chapter 4. And these are great verses to let them really soak into your life. And in 1 John chapter 4, we're going to pick it up in verse 7. John says, he writes this. He says, "Dear friends, let us love one another." That's that second part of the command. He says, "Let us love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love." And we're going to pause on these couple of verses for a few moments here. And in these verses, what we begin to see is that if we want to understand what love is, looks like, feels like, acts like, our source for understanding love is found in God. He says, okay, we got to love one another. And we do that because love, he says, for love comes from God. Here we see that the source of love is always God. Can I tell you, this is so important to understand, that the source of real love is always from God. He says anybody who loves, they know God. That there is some sense in which all love actually is a reflection of God's love in this world. And even when a person may not realize it, any act of love is always a reflection to some degree of knowing God. One of the challenges, I think, if we imagine love like this, I want you to imagine for a moment, love is like water. Some of us think about, we might even hear these words, we should love God with all our heart and love others. And we think about water and we almost think about it like a tap, like on our sink. And so we think, okay, if I'm going to love God, then maybe there are certain moments or points in my life or in my day when I'll turn that tap on and some love is going to come out. And so I want to love God. Maybe I turn that tap on. I go to church today, and then when that's done, it's almost like I turn the tap off. Or maybe I'll, read the Bible today and I'm loving God, and then I turn that tap off. Or I want to love another person, and so I'm going to turn the tap on. I do something kind for them, or maybe I do something nice around the house for somebody to love them, and then I turn the tap off. That's actually not how love is meant to work. What John says is that love comes from God. And what he's saying is that love always finds its source in God. See, love's not like this tap we should be turning on and off. Love is meant to be like this river. And that river of love comes from God. It finds its source in God. He says God is love. God, the one who created all things, who is personal and knows you and wants to know you and connect with you. In his very nature, he is loving. And so love flows from him. And for us to love people is not to kind of add one more, I think I should do this, or I need to do that action. But actually what John says is that if you want to love, everyone who loves knows God. And so the way to become more loving is to get to know God. As you know God, it's like, instead of feeling like it's one more job to do to be loving it, you find yourself caught up in his love, in this river of love that really we believe kind of flows out of God. Love comes from God. And so the way we become more able to live by love is to focus on knowing God. What if in whatever situation in life you found yourself in, even when unexpected things happen, or things that mess up the schedule or the plans or whatever, or things that make you feel a little bit disorientated or confused, what if in every one of those situations, it became an opportunity to get to know God more? And say, God, how in this situation can I know you more? Because everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. And if we don't love, we don't know God. And so one of our core, drivers in life is to actually back up from going, okay, how do I become loving? And to start from this point of how am I getting to know God? Because the more I know God, the more I connect to him, the more I pursue his presence, the more I can find myself beginning to live from this source of love that is who he is. You see, so this is such a huge part of beginning to live by love, is to realize that we actually, when Jesus says that we're to love God with our whole heart and love others as ourselves, Jesus is actually assuming, and we'll see why in just a moment, that we are becoming people who've already living from a foundation of knowing God and his love for us. You see, he goes on here, John does in verse 9. Look at verse 9. He says, this is how God showed his love among us. This is how we're going to really understand God and his love. This is how he showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us. He sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. You know, what's so amazing about how he keeps unfolding here, how we can understand love, is that John is going to help us understand that the foundation, the platform, this foundation that must be there for us to be people who can live by love, is that we must understand that love does not start with us. Love starts with God. As we said, it finds its source in God, and it is expressed, God's love is expressed supremely in this, that it says he sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. See, do you understand that this is God's love towards you? See, if you're going to get to know God, then you need to get to know this, that he is loving towards you. And you can see that most clearly in that he sent his Son into this world for you. You know, the words here, you know, this, he sent his one and only Son in the world that we might live through him. John wants us to understand this, that God's heart is to pursue us. God's love is for us. He sent his Son for us. He came for us. And he sent him not only into this world, but it says he sent him as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. You see, God loves you even though you're not perfect, even though you don't get it all right. God knows that we all fall short, and yet so great is his love that he sent his Son to pursue us, and not only to pursue us, but to be an atoning sacrifice, to pay the penalty, to pay the gap, the debt that each of our lives owes, because we know we're not perfect. We know we have our faults. We know there's brokenness. We know there's things we wish we'd never done, and yet we realize that so great is God's love for you that he sent his Son for you. Now, the reason this is at the core of what it is to live a life of love. It's the core of what it is to be able to live by love. Because what this truth allows us to understand is that we can be free to live from love and not for love. We can be free to live from love and not for love. So here's what I mean by that. What we realize is that kind of our natural human instinct is to live for love. As human beings, because God is love and he's created us to know him, all of us live with a hunger for love in our lives. We're actually made to love. We're created to love. We're created with hearts that are all about love. That's why it's such a huge deal. But the temptation is to sometimes live in such a way, because we want that love so badly, we can try to live in a way to achieve that love. We can try to live in a way to earn that love. We can live our lives always conscious of how other people are thinking about us, perceiving us. Do we feel like they love us, or trying to earn love? And when we do that, we're just living for love. We're trying to reach it, to achieve it. There's a famous quote from Madonna. She gave this in an interview to a magazine. It was in the early 90s. She's at the height of her kind of profession, career, fame, fortune, all those things. And she said these words in an interview, and I think it was Vogue magazine. She said, "I have an iron will, and all of my will has always been to conquer some horrible feeling of inadequacy." This is fascinating. Here's someone who is at the peak of their profession, artistic career, fame, fortune, all of it. And they just talk about this horrible feeling of inadequacy. And then she said, "I'm always struggling with that fear. I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being. And then I get to another stage and I think I'm mediocre. And my drive in life And I find a way to get out of that, to get myself out of that, feeling mediocre and uninteresting. And she says again and again, my drive in life is from this horrible feeling of being mediocre. And that's always pushing me, because even though I've become somebody, I still have to prove that I'm somebody. And she says these words at the end of that, my struggle has never ended and it probably never will. And I think in so many ways, it's a this quote that summarizes how so many people go through life feeling like I've got to keep kind of earning or proving my worth, my adequacy, that I'm somebody. And it's so easy to live for love, of wanting the sense of approval, of adequacy, of security. But what John is trying to help us understand is the only way we will ever feel like we can live free from that struggle that she says I'll probably never be free of. The only way we can actually live free of that is when we understand that, in fact, we are loved. And God has shown his love towards us by sending his son and sending him to rescue us. Because that's how great is God's love toward us. The thing about this is that then all of this idea of understanding God's love, understanding this is who God is loving towards us. God has demonstrated in sending his son for us, not because we were perfect or had it all together, but as a sacrifice even for us. This is how great God's love is. And the whole idea is now, how do we understand that and learn it and experience it? Are we growing in knowing God and knowing that love for us? And it's only out of that platform of knowing we are loved by God that we can now figure out how to love others. In the last part of this paragraph, he says in verse 11, he says, so dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. Since God so loved us, that's how now, because he's so loved us, now we can love one another. In verse 12, he says, no one has ever seen God with their eyes, but if we love one another, then God lives in us and his love is made complete in us. And he finishes with this idea in this little paragraph about now when we understand God's love for us, so let's love one another. Let's do that same, what God's done for us. Let's do that same kind of loving for other people, not because they're perfect, not because they've got it all together, but let's be willing to be for them and be for people. And he says, let us love one another. You know what's amazing as well, as John's saying, he was actually talking to him in a church, in a community of faith, in a tribe, like us here at True North. And he's saying, so because God has so loved us, let's love one another. Sometimes it's almost easier to love the people who are far away from us and distant from us. It's sometimes easier to love people, whose faces we'll never see. But what John's saying is, in this second part of Jesus' command, is that we should love others. And sometimes the hardest place to do that is to start with those people who are right there and close to you, to be gracious to them and forgiving towards them and kind towards them. But if that's how God was to us, then that's how we, he says, ought to be to one another. Life is often unexpected. Life is often, at times, overwhelming. Life is full of choices and trying to figure out, do I go this way? Do I go that way? Do I need this? Do I want that? Life is incredibly complex. But the beautiful thing about what it is to hear Jesus' words is that all of life can be navigated by approaching each and every situation going, okay, what will it look like for me to love God and love others? And in order to do that well, the first thing we see right here in 1 John is that it all begins by understanding God's love for us. It all begins by understanding, do you know that love comes from God? And if you want to know love, get to know God, get to walk with God. It finds its source in him. So come to know God, because as you come to know him, you'll come to know what love is. Get to know God because he's the one who loves you and pursued you and sent his son for you and he's for you. That's That's how God feels about you. And so you don't need to go through life trying to earn love or live for love. You can actually live from his love. And when you're able to find that security in who he is, then guess what? You are freed up to love others for who they are and love them in their brokenness, because you don't need something back from them. You've found love and security in who God is and his love for you, and you're free to now love others. And not only that, but because you know how great his love was towards you, it is what begins to help us understand, well, that's then how I ought to think of others and care for others and be gracious and kind to others. And no matter what comes at us, we can actually go through life going, you know what? The way we navigate, the way we deal with unexpected challenges, the way we figure out what way to go is to always come back to this idea: how can I live by love? How can I live in the Father's love for me? How can I love him with a whole heart and love others as myself? You know, I want to encourage you this week to just, in the midst of complexity, to choose what is simple, and to maybe just begin each day saying, God, how can I know more of your love in my life? And God, how can I know you deeper today? To go through your days beginning to ask and pray the simple prayer: God, how can you help me to love you with my whole heart today? And can you help me to love others as myself? Can I orientate by those two things today? For some of you today, you may be thinking, I'd really like to understand or really explore or know. Can I really know with certainty what John has spoken about here, that actually God does love me, that he sent his son, that Jesus came for me? Or you want to just explore, how can I get to know God more? We are kicking something off this Thursday night. It's called Alpha, and Alpha is a chance and a place to explore how you can know more about who God is, or whether you wonder if he's there or not there, or whether you just want to find a way to get to know more about how could you be, confident or understand who he is or how he thinks about you. Alpha is just a place to explore faith and life and meaning, love and purpose and all those things. And we've got it kicking off in two spaces this week, Marawa and Mullaloo. If you can't be in person, it'll be online, but we'll be kicking off in all likelihood Thursday night at Marawa and Mullaloo. We'll have details for you on here, but if you are wanting to really go deeper in understanding who God is, or what it can look like to know him, or how you can know if it could be true that there is this God who loves you and has come for you, I'd love to have you be a part of that. We'll have all the links for you. But for each one of us, may we go into our lives, into our week, letting this be the one thing that sets us apart. May we go into our weeks, each one of us, as people who know we are loved by God, and who navigate by just wanting to love God and love others. Let's live by love.